Hi everyone, welcome back to GI Live London. This afternoon we have some great talks and panels from the likes of Idea Xbox, Meta and Valve, concluding with a GI Live London drinks reception from 6 p.m, sponsored by Renaissance PR and Amicus. We're also hosting Meet to Match meetings again today until 6 o'clock in rooms 7 to 10, just down the corridor. First, however, we have a talk from the recent GamesIndustry.biz Best Boss winner, AJ Grand-Scrutton from Dlala Studios, who will discuss working with major IP from companies such as Rare and Disney. So please welcome AJ.
I'm really looking forward to next year's awards, so I stopped getting introduced as the UK's best boss. It's lovely though, thank you. Brilliant. So I am AJ Grand-Scrutton. I am the self-appointed CEO of Dlala Studios. So when I was kind of putting this presentation together, I was kind of looking at what aspects would be most useful to talk to people about. And I think really what it boiled down to was the pitching side is probably the most interesting. That's the bit about how you go about getting hold of these IPs and getting to create new products with them. I assume no one knows who I am. I do not take offence to it. I normally go on a bit of a spiel here, but this is the boring bit because no one really cares about me. They care about what I'm here to talk about. But I went to university, half-assed it, spent most of the time playing basketball. I was a lot more svelte in my youth. Took me a long while to get a job after that. My first role became an IT technician at a company that sold wood. The way I describe that to people is, if you've seen the IT crowd, that is a more glamorous version of what my job was. I then got my first job in games as a game content developer. This was a combination designer-programmer role. I then moved on to Bossa for a year, and then after that, in June of 2012, I started Dlala Studios. So my path was I was a programmer who was desperate to be a designer, and somewhere along the line, I ended up skipping that stage and ended up being a director. So most of what I know about how to make games and how to run a company, I know through the fuck-ups I've made. Oh, am I allowed to swear? Am I allowed to swear? Okay, good. Phew. Okay, there we go. So, here's the important stuff, what we did. So, back in 2020, August 2020, we released Battletoads. This was the first Battletoads game in 26 years. Battletoads was one of my favourite franchises as a kid. The original was one of my all-time favourite games. And we had the honour of bringing that to a new audience. So we went there, we redesigned the characters, we rebuilt the world. We told a whole new story. Rare was very, very generous. They gave me near carte blanche on what I did with that IP. What we're doing now, announced at D23 2 weeks ago, something like 2 weeks ago, we're making Illusion Island. So for some reason, the lovely people at Disney thought they would trust me with Mickey, Minnie, Donald and Goofy. So we're making a brand new 4-player cooperative adventure platformer featuring 4 of the most iconic cartoon characters in history. At this point, you're all wondering, what are they all thinking? Why would they give you their IP? Especially as, you know, we're a tiny studio in Essex, tucked away in the hidden regions of Whittam. So, click. You may know what this is. I just wanted to kind of go over quick differences between 2 types of pitches. It's not 2 types, but this will give us a foundational grounding for the rest of the stuff I'm going to talk about. So an RFP is request for proposal, request for pitch. Normally this is where somebody will reach out to you, an IP holder will reach out to you, or your agent, or your representative, and say, hey, we need somebody to put some pitches together for this brand. They'll normally have specific requirements, they'll target specific aspects of the IP. You'll normally have your format specified. We want a 1-pager, we want a 20-pager, we want full concepts, we want game mock-ups. They'll tell you elements to avoid, e.g., hey, this IP from 20 years ago, we love this bit, but this bit is really problematic when, you know, you're looking at it through a modern lens. And normally it's a multi-stage process laid out in advance. Submit this by this date, submit this by a following date, we'll have this conversation. Cold pitch isn't cold necessarily. I'm using this to refer to a non-specified pitch. So this is, they haven't come to you necessarily and asked for this. You may have reached out to them, you may have had somebody else reach out to them, you may have heard through the grapevine, but the idea is you haven't been given a specific brief. So in this world, this is what we're going to be talking about the most in this talk. So there is no set requirements, because I've missed an E. No set requirements. So they haven't said to you, we're looking for this type of genre, this length of production cycle. The format is unspecified. No one said we want a one-pager, we want a deck. And there's a multi-stage process that exists in a room somewhere that you don't know about. And this is the majority of pitches we do. We have RFPs, we've replied to RFPs, but most of the time in Dlala's 10-year history, most of the time we're cold pitching. So, click. Let's talk about pitching for established IP. Before you start, here's my pre-pitch checklist. How boring a slide. This is important. So, if you want to get into existing and licensed IP, licensed IP was a very dirty term about 15 years ago, but let's be honest, that is what I do. First of all, you need to think about the IP you're interested in. What's the IP you feel you and your team could do justice to? I've made this list every year for the last 8 years. I will go through and I'll do a new version of this list. Then, look, not even bullet points. Look into who the IP holders, I'll do a new version of this if you want to put this on the internet. Look into who the IP holders are. Google and Wiki is a fine starting point. Most of the time on Wikipedia you can find out an IP's parent company. You can Google around. It can get a bit complicated. You'll often find that the rights for the digital product might have been already kind of licensed to someone else, but in general, you can put together a reasonably good spreadsheet of, here's the IP I like, who owns it? And then just try to reach out. Find a contact, go through generic contacts initially if you have to. Please don't harass people on LinkedIn. No one wants to be harassed on LinkedIn. But trying to find out if they're even willing to listen to pitches, because you don't want to spend a lot of time working on a 60-page deck if the answer is, oh, no, we're already doing something, or, oh, we're not touching that IP at the moment. And something to think about here as well. Come out with a puppet. How good would that have been? Is decks take time. The common misconception I had up until about 3 years ago was like, pitching and decks don't cost you any money. Like, if you're not spending money on getting art assets made, decks are free. Well, they're not, because you're spending your time. And your time, whether billable or not, takes you away from doing other things. It costs the company money in some way, sense, or form. So please try to find out information as much as possible in advance before committing to these decks. We're very lucky. We're represented by a slick-haired LA agent at CAA, who often I will go, here's the IP I want, can you go find out if they'll listen to me? But not everyone is in that position, but do what you can to find out. If you've got contacts, I have people reaching out to me to ask if I can do introductions, and where possible, I'm always happy to do that. This is a big thing. People often choose IP they think is going to make money and be successful. You have to choose IP you love. Like, these are my pre-project, a very small percentage of my pre-project Mickey memorabilia, etc. That is my childhood copy of Castle of Illusion and Quackshot. I have no idea how my Mega Drive games are in such good condition, but that is my childhood copy, and it was sitting next to my desk before we started work on this project. I love Mickey and Friends. I'm a big Disney fan. Lots of the studio are big Disney fans. My love for Mickey goes all the way back to Steamboat Willie, all the way through to Wonderful World. So it was important for me that, if we get this, it has to show that love. But the main reason for this is because you have to absorb everything. Here's my first big bit of advice. If you are going to pitch on an IP, you need to be at least temporarily the Wikipedia for that IP. And that doesn't mean you have to know everything, but it has to mean you've done your best to absorb all you can. Literally before pitching this again to Disney, I went and I watched all the cartoons on Disney+. I read the comics. I read the Bible-length 90-year history of Mickey Mouse. I went back and played the games. I went into the Disney fandom wiki. I made sure that my passion for Mickey was supported by my knowledge of Mickey. And the big reason is this question. Can you live in this world for years of your life? Because that is what you will be doing. I pitched this project in October 2019, and it's not out yet, right? So we were finishing off Battletoads, so it was a big period of time. In that period of time, we weren't working on this, but that meant that this had to own a bit of me for that period of time. Once we started, Mickey and Friends has been my life. This has been the world I had been living in, including the world we have created for this game, but the existing world. If you're going to do good IP stuff, this is the question you have to be willing to answer. And if the answer to this is no, then I just wouldn't bother. Because If you're making something that already exists, there are creators that created that you just deserve the respect of, you honouring it, and there's a fan base that probably exists. And speaking of someone who made a fan base very, very angry in 2020, a lot of those fan bases are very vocal. So just be prepared to live your life in this world. Cool. That's a bit harsh, AJ. Your pitch isn't everything. Your team is everything. You are everything. But for the purpose of this conversation, your pitch is everything. Core goals. I'm really hoping where this has been saved, it says 1-1-1 again. Oh, come on. Look, core goals are your pitch. This sounds obvious, but let's just go over it anyway. You're here to show an awesome idea, you're here to show an awesome team, and you're here to show an awesome knowledge of IP. That is the core goals of this pitch. It's really the core goals of any pitch when the IP is your IP, but it's especially important here. So, I've got detail on some of these slides, I haven't on this. Strong creative is the most important part. If you've got a weak game idea, then it doesn't matter how great all the rest of this pitch is, because it's a weak game idea. Our friends over at Xbox, you're not interested in weak game ideas, are you? Exactly. I'm not here to tell you how to put together a strong creative. There are much more interesting talks for more interesting people on that, but this has got to be your foundational starting point. Make sure you're doing something awesome. It doesn't even have to be something new and kind of completely innovative. If it's something super fun and super awesome, it's a great foundational point. Which bits of the IP? Excuse me. I'm on the back of being a bit poorly. Cool. So, this is really important. Some IP is tiny. Some IP has only existed for a very small period of time, doesn't have a particularly big extended universe. That makes it super easy, because you're just basically pitching for the whole thing. Mickey and Friends, for instance, not like that. Mickey and Friends has existed longer than we have, right? So when you're looking at your IP, start figuring out what the bits you want to pitch on are. Who are the characters? Make sure you include that in the deck. These are the characters. This is how those characters will be construed in our game world. What locations? Is this a brand new world? Illusion Island, for instance, is a brand new world called Monoth, or is it existing? I could have said it in Mouseton or Duckburg. So which locations do you want to set this game in? How do those locations get reflected in your game? Where does it fit in the existing canonical timeline? Dangerous question. 99% of the time, I would always recommend you don't try and do something that is canon. Canon being, it is, if you do this, it changes the timeline of the actual IP that exists, right? It's the difference between the new Star Wars films and what happened to the extended universe. They got made non-canonical. You can pitch for a canonical timeline, but it's just risky, because at that point, you're then going to be involved with a lot of people who aren't necessarily involved normally. Do you see it as being canonical extended universe? Thanks, AJ, got ahead of yourself. What is the setting which justifies the use of the world? So, especially for media that isn't games IP, quite often what you want to make sure you do is justify why this makes sense. And it sounds weird, because a lot of the time, especially as game developers, we go, oh my God, this is an awesome idea, I just want to make it and play it. And that is great justification for us. But when you're pitching for this stuff, you need to justify why this makes sense, why this story makes sense, why this game makes sense for these characters, for this world. And this is a detail you want to get in the deck. You don't want to be doing slides that look like this, full of bullet points and text. You want to kind of pretty things up as much as possible, but this is some of the core content you need to include. Inspirations. I'm going to be naughty here, and I'm going to show bits of slides I'm not sure I'm allowed to show. Nothing from Mickey, don't get excited. Cool, so this is a really ugly slide from the deck that got us Battletoads. Inspirations is really useful, especially when talking to non-game people, because often we're told to do a razor. Hey, here's your 3 points of comparison. I mean, Mr. Backler, you've probably had 400 of these slides. These are if somebody knows nothing about game design, and they read nothing else of your deck, it's a single slide you can talk to speak about some of the core mechanics of the game, and also trying to put some popular games in there as well. So for us, when we were pitching Battletoads, we knew we wanted the side-scrolling combat, we wanted it to be a playable cartoon. Castle Crashers was a great reference. God of War, we weren't making a AAA God of War, but what God of War did really well was fluidity. Even the older games, they felt very fluid, the experience and the action was fluid, they did set pieces. This was stuff we wanted in there. And Battletoads. So this is twofold. Obviously, it's a no-brainer. If you're pitching for a Battletoads game, you mentioned Battletoads. Oh, head poking around the corner. If you're pitching for any IP, I would always recommend you put that IP as one of your inspirations. Like, it sounds corny, but it is important. It should show that you want it to be. And for us, with Battletoads, we wanted to show which part of the franchise was the important one. We weren't making a new Battletoads arcade, we were making a new Battletoads. So we put this slide here. My advice to you on these slides is, if your game is influenced by a quirky Japanese title that sold 10,000 copies in England, it's not going to be good enough to put on there, even if it is your biggest inspiration, or a quirky indie title that is fantastic. It doesn't matter, because the people signing off on this stuff want to see a game that they can type in and see the words, sold 500,000 copies. So I'm not telling you to lie. What I'm saying is make sure you try and find a way to root to your truth in something that has had financial success. Because let's be honest, a lot of the time, that's all the people are looking for on the other end. Storytelling. What's this one? Sweet. So here's a picture that never saw the light of day. So this isn't necessarily just about the story, but understanding your audience. And what I mean by that is not who the audience is that's going to see the game, it's who you're pitching to. For instance, when I pitch to Disney, I don't claim for a second that I can tell stories better than Disney, because no one can tell stories better than the companies that Disney own. It's fact, right? But so what I did was I did lighter touch. Here's a story and a conceit we think wraps the world, but we want to work with you to really develop this. If you're pitching for something that isn't necessarily a story-driven IP, then sure, you can show off your storytelling skills on this slide, right? But this one isn't about the showing off. This one is about making everything else make sense. Here is the conceit for which the game sits in, and the way you kind of pursue that is dependent on who your target is. Don't tell storytellers that you know how to write stories better than them, but give those people who aren't natural storytellers the faith that you can bring something to the IP. That leads to this. Do you want me to write the story? I'm not asking you if you want me to write the story. It's a fair question to ask, and you don't necessarily have to word it this way, but I always try and broach this in the initial pitch meeting. Like, hey, if we're doing this, are we going to get to write the story with our writers? Are you more comfortable if you have some of your writers involved? And that is a spectrum. That's not binary yes or no. That is just a spectrum of answers. But I'd always advise you broach this early enough, because if they turn around and it's very clear that, like, you stay away from story, then you just peel back everything story related in the rest of the pitch you're going to do. If it's clear to you that they don't care, they want you to go with it, then you can be as flamboyant with the story as you want in your pitch. But use this as a pivot early on to describe how you're going to approach the rest of your pitch. Story, story, story. Deck must tell a story. So, this is something our agent drilled into me for the last 7 years. Your deck itself is a story. And that is, it should take somebody on a journey from your first slide to your thank you slide, and please always put a thank you slide. From your first slide to your thank you slide, you are telling a story. Your deck has to feel like it has a natural flow, and it has those cadences that you would get in a story. The way I recommend doing this is very early on, normally after your inspiration, establish your 3 core pillars of your project. So this is something we do actually for designing games. We have 3 core pillars for the game, we have 3 art pillars, 3 design pillars, but they all relate back to the 3 core pillars. And this is just what are the big rules for your game. Every decision you make, you kind of fire through the lens of these. So on Battletoads, for instance, one of ours was like, make it toady. Now, that means nothing to anyone else, but the whole idea of that was, if a normal human could do this action, then it doesn't really make sense that our superhuman toads were doing it. So everything was taken through the lens of like, okay, like we want to do some cool traversal. Oh, toads have got wicked tongues. Let's do some stuff with the tongues. Or like, hey, you know, it'd be cool to have some weird kind of mechanics that slow people down. Toads spit, right? Ah, that fits the characters. Yeah, let's have some gross spit mechanics. Everything went through those. So very early on, I suggest you establish your 3 pillars, and then you structure your deck thereafter based around those. So use them as title cards. If Make It Toady is your first pillar, your first title card is Make It Toady, and then you describe anything that falls under that. Cool. This is the big parts for me. Demonstrating the knowledge. What's this slide, AJ? I'm nervous every slide now. Cool, so here's a Rick and Morty pitch we did a few years ago. Oh, James, I'm giving you lots of juicy stuff here you can write about. This is one of our ugliest decks. This was pre us knowing how to put together a nice looking deck. The reason I use this is because if you look at the tone, stop off at blips and chips and play a load of crappy knockoff retro games. Fed up with modern engaging gameplay, earn enough crystal tickets to finally get blah, blah, blah. The whole idea with this was, the whole deck was written in the tone of Rick and Morty. So when we're pitching for IP, part of the absorb process is so that I can then write the deck in the tone of that IP. So obviously, if I'm pitching Mickey and Friends, there's not necessarily a set tone. I know to avoid certain words and not be too brash and abrasive or offensive. When I'm doing Rick and Morty, it was the exact opposite. It was like, okay, if this was written in a script and like it was going to come up on the television in the show, or Rick was going to say it, how would I word it? And that's how I worded every slide. This is a great chance for you to kind of show your knowledge by showing and reflecting the tone of the IP in how you're presenting the deck. Don't be horrible. If the characters are not very nice, you can be not very nice on slides. You shouldn't be not very nice when you're pitching it to people. But it's a great way to just demonstrate your understanding. Theme, what's next? Whew. Cool, so make the slides fit the brand. It's very easy if you're pitching an existing IP to look at that IP and look at it over how it's used, figure out what the colors are that the company uses to show that IP. If there's any associated fonts and you can get versions of those fonts off the web, get them. And then also Google Images is your friend. We don't all have time to knock up bespoke imagery, and I think I'll talk about that in a minute. So there's nothing wrong with just going on a Google image search and just filling your deck with appropriate Google images. Don't shove them in for the sake of it, but like this slide, we used it to accent what we were trying to describe. Who's this for? It's a good question. Who is your audience? This will get asked of you, right? You take a brand like Star Wars and it's got a breadth of audience. So what part of that audience are you targeting? Have I got this as the next bit? Yes, good. Do not say everyone. Who are you making this game for? Everyone. No, you're not. Like, it's a lie. You know, you want everyone in the world to play it. We all want everyone in the world to play our games. But you're not making a game for everyone. You are making a game for an audience. So make sure you can speak to who that audience is. Because especially for brand owners, their audience is everything, right? Like, if you demonstrate you know who the audience is and what part of that audience you're targeting, it makes you look good. If you go in and you're just like, yeah, man, Star Wars fans are going to play the game. Well, who's a Star Wars fan? Because I'll tell you what, I'm not a Jar Jar Binks fan, so if you've got a Jar Jar Binks game, I'm a big Star Wars fan and I won't play it. I mean, I might try it. But have an understanding of who your audience is. If you can be specific, that's great. Talk to, hey, you know, we think this is really going to appeal to a teen audience from this age to this age. It's most likely people that engage with the television shows and the comics, but we think it probably won't appeal to those people that enjoy the younger skewing cartoons, right? Try to figure out what part of the existing audience you are talking to. Awesome. Okay. I'm only saying awesome because I can't remember what... I wrote most of this yesterday and I still can't remember most of what I did. This is really important. This is a slide, and I would literally call this slide Why Now or Opportunities. This is a slide describing why now is the right time for you to make this game. And that means why it's good for you to start now and why it's good for you to finish this game and release it in 2, 3, 4 years, etc. So think about this. Are there no existing game titles within this IP, or at least no titles within this area of the IP? You know, using the Star Wars example, we've had a fantastic range of Star Wars titles over the last 30 years. You know, Jedi Power Battles was a fantastic, weird little side-scrolling co-op game, and that was a very different audience to what we got with Rogue Squadron. So, what areas of the IP are you trying to title to take advantage of a current opportunity? Show gaps on platforms for this title. This is both the IP and the genre. We know that PlayStation has Spider-Man, and it has that game, and it's amazing. I'm sure if Xbox could have an IP like that and appeal to that audience, they would be very interested. So how do we show there is that gap in the market for those type of titles for this IP and audience? Why will the audience like this, and why is an audience ready for this? Show, that, like, if no one has done this game, if no one's made a Battletoads game in 26 years, you have to explain why it makes sense to do one. As I said to Rare when I pitched, I presumed a third of the original Battletoads audience were dead. A third of them probably haven't got time to play games because, you know, they have kids. And then at most, we could probably target a third of that original audience. So if I'm purely looking at that, that's not a good opportunity. What the opportunity was was to re-engage some people, but focus on bringing Battletoads to a wider new audience. So why is the audience ready for a title like this? And then this one, show crossovers in pop culture and trends which justify this title. That is a very un-me-like sentence that I actually did write. This was a big one for Rick and Morty, for instance, and it was a big one for Battletoads as well. In Battletoads, we spoke about the resurgence of the GameStop meme and the fact that Rare Replay had come out and done a load of units which brought Battletoads to a new audience again. What is happening in pop culture and trends in general which show that making a game for this IP is right. It's the right time and we should do it now. Why you? Because you're wonderful, of course. So, this was from Earthworm Jim. James, if you want to reference that, this is from an Earthworm Jim pitch. A long time ago. A long, long time ago. Why does it make sense? Why should Dlala make this game for us? So why are Dlala the right team to do it? Well, we've got great existing platform holder relationships, you know. We had a reasonable relationship with Valve and Sony, and obviously Microsoft are our bosom buddies for a very long time. We've got great multi-platform experience. Obviously, back then, these were the appropriate platforms. We'd worked with respected IP, and that slide there, the bit that says experience with respected IP, don't just include what the studio's done, shove in what the individuals on your team has done. Dlala had never made a SpongeBob, Star Wars, Aladdin or Merlin game, but the people on our team had. So we were able to put that in this slide. And we don't lie about it, but it's better to lead with this and explain it later. And then the existing tools and pipelines. Big thing for us is our tools we built over the last decade. We've been doing these 2D games for the better part of that decade. We've got this incredible tool set that sits on top of Unity. So when we're pitching for these 2D playable cartoon games, we can show, look at what we can do. There's not really many people doing what we do. So think about what makes you the right team for this game. And always include the fact that you're a fan. The next slide after this, in this deck, which I'm not showing, literally said, we heart Earthworm Jim. And in Battletoads, we had we heart Battletoads. And neither are a lie, both very, very true. But that's important. They want to know that a fan is going to take this and look after it. Oh, whoever put the aircon on, thank you. Cool, visuals. Oh, this is going to be the one that gets me in trouble, isn't it? Don't just say it's going to look like the comic, TV show or film. Don't just say this game is going to look like what you have already created, because it's not. It's very, very unlikely, and you probably don't want it to, and they don't want it to. So, visual style. Very simple slide. Take some reference images if you've got them, draw some new ones. I didn't include any new ones in here. But like this read this paragraph here. Visuals influenced by SpongeBob feature films such as Sponge on the Run, combined with the visual style mashup techniques of animated hits like Mitchell's vs. Machines, create a beautiful 3D rendered world sprinkled with the magic and personality of classic SpongeBob styles. It's a sales pitch. That's what this slide is. But it gave them a really good idea of what we were pitching them. They knew we were pitching that tactile feeling SpongeBob that you see in the modern cartoons, but we were going to do some 2D elements in there as well. You don't have to necessarily have bespoke art, but it will help at times. If you're pitching to a very visually driven company, being able to show how you would achieve your vision of their art is important, but it's expensive. You know, was it last year? Last year or the year before, we didn't really spend any money at Dlala on pitches. Like, we didn't spend money on creating assets. Since then, I've spent a lot more. Like, other pitches have cost upwards of $10,000, $12,000, just because we've had to get, like, you know, we're the 2D studio, so if we pitch anything 3D, we have to prove we can do 3D, for instance. I feel you can still pitch this stuff without bespoke art. If you have the resource available to do it, it's worth putting some concept art in, or a gameplay mock-up. So if you're describing it for someone in the room that isn't a game person, they can look at something and understand. This is a big one. Tell them how you're going to help them. How are you going to help this IP and brand? So, obvious one, right? I didn't say to Disney, I'm going to help you sell toys, because who knows how to sell toys better than the Disney company, right? But what the big thing for us was with Battletoads, and to an extent Mickey, is we're trying to bring a new audience in. We're trying to invigorate brands that haven't necessarily connected with the gaming audience for a while. Or, you know, for some other stuff we pitched on, we've seen it as a gateway for a new portion of the audience. Hey, you know what? You've got fantastic stuff over here in this media. These comics are wonderful, but what about if we took this audience over here that exists at games and we brought them in, and then we went, hey, you know what? you love our game, guess what? There's some wicked comics. And it's a great way to onboard people. So explain how you're going to help the IPs and brands by doing this. What are you going to do for them? Because you are effectively sitting in a room asking them to give you their baby, right? So justify why it makes sense from their perspective. Cool. I feel safe about this because it's all Dlala stuff. James is like, all right, don't need the laptop now. Studio deck. So they will ask for it. If you haven't sent it already, it's easy to include it in your pitch at the end. First thing about doing a studio, you've missed all the interesting bits, people. The most important thing about a studio deck is don't be modest. I've mentored a wonderful studio in Manchester called White Paper Games for the better part of a decade. They're one of the most talented, underutilised studios, in my opinion, in the industry. Pete is so overly humble. I tell him, like, you don't need to be. You don't have to be braggy and egotistic, but saying what you are very good at is not being egotistic. It is selling yourself. Very first slide in our studio deck. Look at these wonderful reviews we had for Battletoads, and we had 1 million players within 6 weeks of launch. Like, straight out the bat, just put your biggest accomplishments there. Make sure that if somebody goes, oh, Dlala Studios, click, they then go, oh, wow, Dlala Studios have done some cool stuff. Don't put your 4 out of 10 reviews on there that said some nasty words about you. Definitely wouldn't advise that. But you cherry pick this stuff. This is your studio deck. Just don't lie. But don't be modest at any point. You are there to sell yourself. Hit them with headlines. I didn't check this slide. I really should have checked this slide. Cool. So, something I'll touch on here as well. I have a folder and a file called Dlala Studio Studio Deck Template. Inside of that deck, there's roughly 3 to 4 variations of every slide, and I cherry pick which of those slides I'm going to send depending on who I'm sending them to. So I will swap out content. All of that content is true. None of it is lying. But I will reformat that deck and re-choose what slides I'm using depending on who I'm talking to and sending this to. This, I don't know what version this was, but like, hey, this is just going, hey, look, we're very experienced in looking after IP. We made the award-winning, it won 1 award, so I can say it, Battletoads. We have an established team ready to move on to the next project with no ramp-up time. We work with award-winning composer David Housden, and we're a multi-time partner with Disney. This was a great way for us to pitch ourselves for other IP. A minute. Cool, I'm nearly at the end now. Show your strengths. So you need slides in there about kind of your headline staff members. This doesn't mean you undervalue your other staff, but who are the ones that best sell your studio? We have Eric Chacon. Eric is literally nearly a 30-year veteran. He started out working on the original Earthworm Jim. He has worked on incredible 2D and 3D stuff. If I shove logos of companies and games he has worked on at the bottom of a slide, people that aren't reading the slide will be like, oh, I know that stuff. So put your big hitters in there. You know, we have like some of the core studio heads like me and Craig and Ben, our tech director, and E. But whoever you've got on your team that's got a wonderful resume can go in this section. Specialities, cool. Have a quick roundup slide, which kind of, once again, I've got 4 versions of this. Quick roundup slide, which rounds up what's appropriate for your pitch. We are hand-drawn 2D specialists who have worked with existing franchises. We've got 10 plus years experience in the engine, so it doesn't matter what you've heard about Unity, we know how to work around it. Multi-platform experience, we've worked on lots of different platforms. And hey, guess what? Some of the core members of the team have won awards for multiplayer games. And as you can imagine, that is the version that goes in stuff I'm pitching that is multiplayer. Cool, show your relevant experience. So take the stuff at the bottom of that other slide and expand it out for a big slide at the end. You know, if you've got team members that have worked on big franchises for big companies, shove it on here because it's worth saying, because it builds trust. If you've got people that have worked on Football Manager, it doesn't matter if you're not pitching on Football Manager, it shows that you've got people that have shipped products. Most important things, it's the end, I promise. The important word. Respect. That doesn't mean give people in the room respect without earning it. Don't believe in that. But tell them and show them how you will respect their IP. Because that is what they're really worried about. They're, you know, most of you here, am I getting beeped off? Most of you here probably work on original IP. Like, the thought of somebody taking that and doing stuff with it that you don't have control of is probably terrifying, right? But that's effectively what you're saying. You're saying to these, look, I said to the Walt Disney Company, hey, I want to take your 96-year-old IP and do some stuff with it. Like, I had to show them I was going to respect Mickey and Friends, which I always was, but they don't know that. So just to make sure you demonstrate that and make sure you are very sincere that you are not here to make a quick buck off the IP. You are here to give it love and care and treat it as if it's your own and do something really awesome with it that maybe they can't do internally, and that's why you provide value. And then a dirty word. It's not actually a dirty word. Passion. We don't use that word in some instances. We don't ask for passion for, you don't need to have a passion for games to work in games. That's a big thing we all learn, right? People that don't love playing games can make games and be better than the rest of us. Pitching for an IP, you need passion. They need to know that love. It's not just the respect, it's showing them how much you love this. I genuinely love Mickey Mouse. Genuinely love Mickey Mouse. My office is full of Mickey Mouse stuff. I had a giant Mickey Mouse painted on my wall when we were doing stuff back in the day. And when our project went away, I had to paint over it with tears in my eyes. I had to pack up a load of stuff because I couldn't in my heart face looking at all my Disney stuff anymore. Like, I love Mickey, and so when I pitched Mickey, there was no one that left that room, no one that left any room ever with me who has worked for Disney that doesn't know how much I love Mickey. I mean, I'm a grown man, maybe I shouldn't love Mickey quite as much. But this is important. You're pitching for IP, show them how much you love it. And like my very first slide said, only pitch for the IP you love. Only pitch for the stuff you're willing to absorb, that you're willing to live in. Because, especially as leaders, not everyone on your team is going to be that into the IP. Hopefully, like me, you have a team who, we have a very broad, appealing IP that they all love. But there are people that aren't going to be, but they will be influenced and they will feel inspired if they see how much you love it. If the people heading the ship are just like, oh my God, I love Mickey Mouse all the time, they'll get a bit annoyed with you, but they'll feel like they're doing something special. So just make sure you keep that respect and passion in mind. Thank you. And I did have questions, but I'm not allowed them because I'm getting... Oh, I'm sure everyone had loads of questions, so please hold. But if anyone wants to ask anything afterwards, I will be hanging about, so please come and see me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, AJ. Thank you, AJ. Brilliant stuff. Yeah, apologies we couldn't have any questions there. And we have quite a few online as well, but we just didn't have time to get to them, unfortunately. But for those in the room, if you want to chat to AJ, he'll be around this afternoon. Thank you very much for that. Fantastic. Next up, we have a presentation about opportunities on the Xbox platform. So please welcome from Idea to Xbox, Ben Robinson.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Opportunities with Idea to Xbox. My name is Ben Robinson. I'm a strategic partner manager on the Idea to Xbox team. I've played games my entire life, starting with the original Sonic in 1991. I've worked in the industry for 14 years, and I spent the past 11 of those on the Xbox team. Today, I'm excited to show you all the opportunities and resources we have in place to help you succeed in our ecosystem.